Hello everyone and welcome to Module 4. This week our focus is going to be on the systems of the lymphatic system, the cardiovascular system, and the respiratory system. So for this unit, we are looking at chapters 7, 8, and 9 in your textbook. So let's begin with chapter 7. And chapter 7 is going to be talking about the respiratory system. The respiratory system is responsible for the exchange of gases such as oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen is a tasteless, odorless, colorless gas that is essential for human respiration. It is carried to all of the cells of your body in exchange for carbon dioxide, which is a waste product. Carbon dioxide is a tasteless, colorless, odorless gas produced by the body's cells during metabolism. The lungs and the airways transport oxygen-enriched air from the atmosphere to the lungs and carry waste carbon dioxide from the lungs to the atmosphere in a process called breathing or ventilation. Breathing helps to regulate the pH of your blood and help to maintain homeostasis. The breathing process begins with the act of inhalation. This means that the air is drawn into the nasal cavity. It gets filtered, heated, and moistened to prepare itself for the journey to the lungs. After the nasal cavity, air passes to the throat, which is also called the pharynx. This passage is both food and air. It will then pass through the larynx or the voice box, and it joins with the trachea, which is also known as your windpipe. This allows the air passage to stay open. On top of the larynx is the epiglottis. This seals off the air passage to the lungs during swallowing. This is so food and liquids do not flow into the lungs, and only air is allowed to go into the lungs. After the trachea, there are two branches called the bronchi, which are the singular term, but the plural term is bronchus. One branch leads to the right lung, the other to the left lung. Each bronchus divides into smaller and smaller branches, which will then form what we call bronchioles. Bronchioles. At the end of the bronchioles are tiny air sacs called alveoli, which is a singular term, and alveolus, which is the plural term. The alveoli resemble a small balloon because it expands and contracts with the inflow and outflow of air. Within the tissue membranes of the alveoli are the pulmonary capillaries. This is where your carbon dioxide will mix with the blood in the pulmonary capillaries and enter the alveoli space, while the oxygen from the alveoli mixes with the blood. Once that exchange of gases has happened, the freshly oxygenated blood will return to the heart, and the oxygen is now ready to be delivered to the tissues. Now, the lungs are divided into two lobes. There are 3 lobes in your right lung and 2 lobes in your left lung. And this is because of the fact that the heart takes the third space of the left lung. Respiration is the process where oxygen is taken from the air and carried to the body cells for their use, while carbon dioxide, water, and other waste products generated by the cells are returned to the environment as waste products. Respiration is a 4 separate process. The first is pulmonary ventilation, or more commonly called breathing. It includes the actions of inhalation, or air in, and exhalation, air out. External respiration, which is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the alveoli and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. The third is transportation of the respiratory gases which is when the blood is aided by the cardiovascular system, transports the carbon dioxide to the lungs and the oxygen to the body cells. And the fourth process is internal respiration. This is where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the body cells and the blood happens in the systemic capillaries. That's going to wrap up Chapter 7. We're going to move into Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is the cardiovascular system. This is composed of the heart and the blood cells. The heart is a hollow, muscular organ lying in the mediastinum, or middle of the chest, which is the center of the thoracic cavity between the lungs. Pumping action of the heart propels blood and contains oxygen, nutrients, and other vital products from the heart to the body cells through a network of blood vessels. Those vessels are considered arteries and veins. Arteries branch into smaller vessels until they become microscopic vessels called capillaries. The capillaries then merge to form a larger blood vessel called venules, and then venules combine together to create veins. The veins are the vessels that return blood to the heart and begin that cardiac cycle again. The vascular system has 3 major types of vessels which will carry blood throughout the body. Each type of vessel differs in structure and function. The first one we have is an artery. Arteries will carry blood from the heart to all the cells of the body. Arteries need to be strong and flexible as they will need to withstand the surge of blood that comes with each contraction of the heart. The surge of blood that is felt when blood is pumped is referred to as a pulse. Arterial blood contains high concentrations of oxygen and appears bright red in color. Oxygenated blood travels to smaller arteries called arterioles that then become the smallest vessel called capillaries. So the second type is a capillary. These are microscopic vessels that join the arterial system with the venous system. Even though they are the smallest, capillaries have the most important role or function. Capillaries have a wall that is composed of only a single layer of endothelial tissue cells, meaning that they are very thin. Due to this thinness, the exchange of water, respiratory gases, macromolecules, metabolites, and other waste products can happen within the blood. There are a large number of capillaries branching from the arterioles. This causes the blood to flow very slowly, providing sufficient time for the exchange of essential gases and substances. The third type is veins. Veins return blood to the heart, and they are formed from smaller vessels called venules that develop from the union of capillaries. Veins use other methods to return blood to the heart, including skeletal muscle contractions, gravity, respiratory activity, and valves. The heart is a muscular pump that propels blood to the entire body through a closed vascular network. The heart is found in a sac called the pericardium, and the pericardium has 3 distinct tissue layers. The endocardium, which is the membrane that lines the 4 chambers of the heart and its valves. The myocardium, which is a muscular layer of the heart, and the epicardium, which is the outermost layer of the heart. The heart is, divided into 4 chambers. The upper 2 chambers of the heart are called the atrium, and then they are split into the right and the left atrium. These 2 chambers will collect blood from the body. The lower 2 chambers of the heart are called the ventricles. They, again, are also called the right and left ventricle. These 2 chambers will pump blood from the heart to the body. The right ventricle will pump blood to the lungs for oxygenation, and the left ventricle will pump blood to the entire body. Now, if you remember, I did say that the heart is a closed vascular system, and I want to explain that a bit so you have a good understanding. Deoxygenated blood from the body will return to the right atrium of the heart through two large veins, the superior and inferior vena cava. The superior vena cava will collect blood from the upper part of the body, or the superior part. The inferior vena cava will collect blood from the lower part of the body, or the inferior. Once the blood comes into the right atrium, it is passed through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. So the tricuspid valve has 3 layers. When the heart contracts, the blood leaves the right ventricle through the left and the right pulmonary veins and travels to the lungs. When it reaches the lungs, the pulmonary arteries branch into millions of capillaries and then to the alveolus. This is where the carbon dioxide in the blood will exchange for oxygen that has been drawn into the lungs during inhalation. The pulmonary capillaries then unite to form 2 pulmonary veins, 2 for the right and 2 for the left. These vesicles then carry oxygenated blood back to the heart, deposit the blood into the left atrium. From there, the blood will pass into the left ventricle through the mitral valve, which is also known as the bicuspid valve, and bicuspid means 2-layered. When the ventricles contract, causing the oxygenated blood to leave the heart through the largest artery in the body, the aorta. The aorta then branches into smaller arteries that carry blood to all parts of the body, which then they get picked up again by that superior and inferior vena cava, and the process starts all over again. Blood pressure is the force exerted by the blood against the arterial walls during 2 phases of a heartbeat. The contraction phase, which is also called asystole or systolic. This is when the blood is forced out of the heart and it produces the maximum force. The second phase is called the relaxation phase, also called the diastole or diastolic. This is when the ventricles are filling with blood, and this produces the weakest force. Blood pressure is recorded as 2 figures separated by a diagonal line, or in other words, a fraction. So for example, a reading of 130/90 means that the patient has a systolic pressure of 130 and a diastolic pressure of 90. This is a vital sign that is typically given and taken to give the provider a snapshot of how the patient's heart is doing. Not all of you will be performing these, but it's good to have that basic understanding of what blood pressure is and what it does for the heart. All right, that's going to wrap up Chapter 8. Let's finish strong with Chapter 9. Chapter 9 is discussing blood, lymph, and the immune systems. The blood, lymph, and immune systems are very common, and they share common cells, structures, functions, and a lot of the same tasks. Although the blood, lymph, and immune systems are discussed separately, their functions and structures overlap. Blood is a body tissue composed of cells suspended in a liquid medium called plasma. 2 important blood cells, monocytes and lymphocytes, provide protection to the body against invasion by disease-causing organisms or other harmful substances. These 2 blood cells are considered part of the immune system. Plasma now is the form of interstitial fluid exchanges its beneficial products for cellular waste found in the surrounding tissues. After the exchange of products, some of the interstitial fluid enters the intensive network of lymph vessels as lymph and becomes part of the lymphatic system. Blood makes up about 8% of all of the body's tissue and is essential to life. Blood is connective tissue composed of a liquid medium called plasma and solid components, which are red blood cells or erythrocytes, white blood cells or leukocytes, and platelets or thrombocytes. Red blood cells or erythrocytes transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, and they are the most numerous of the blood cells. Red blood cells or erythrocytes will live for about 120 days and then they will rupture. White blood cells or leukocytes will produce and protect the body against invasions by pathogens, and they will remove debris from injured tissue and aid in the healing process. White blood cells are crucial to the body's defense against disease. Platelets, or thrombocytes, are the smallest formed element found in blood. They are not true cells, but merely cell fragments. Platelets initiate blood clotting when they enter or encounter damaged vessels that have been injured or traumatized. The entire job of a platelet is to control bleeding, also called hemostasis. Blood cells have an infinite lifespan, and the body continually replaces them. The body produces millions of blood cells every second to replace those that are damaged or destroyed. In adults, blood cells are formed in the bone marrow of the skull, ribs, sternum, vertebrae, pelvis, and the end of your long bones. The development of blood cells into their mature form is called hematoptosis or hemoptosis. One other area that I want to discuss is blood types. Human blood is divided into 4 types: A, B, AB, or O. This is based on the presence or absence of specific antigens on the surface of your red blood cells or erythrocytes. Each of these 4 blood types, the plasma, does not contain the antibody against the antigen that is present on the red blood cells, but rather contains the opposite antibodies. So, for example, a patient with type A blood contains type A antigens on the surface of their red blood cells, and the plasma contains B antibodies in the plasma. It's important to know what blood type you are for things like transfusions, transplants, and even maternal fetal incompatibilities. This lymph system consists of fluid called lymph, a network for transporting vessels called lymph vessels, and multiplicity of other structures including nodes, spleen, thymus, and tonsils. There are 3 main functions of the lymph system. The first is maintaining fluid balance of the body by draining interstitial fluid from the tissue spaces and returning it to the blood. The second is transporting lipids or fats away from the digestive organs for the use of the body. And the third is to filter and remove unwanted infectious products from the lymph nodes. The immune system is where our bodies have numerous lines of defense called resistance, and they fall into the immune system. We have monocytes, lymphocytes, humoral immunity, and cellular immunity. Monocytes stay in the vascular system briefly, and then they enter tissue spaces and become what we call macrophages. These will consume a larger number of pathogens, including bacteria and viruses. Lymphocytes are one of 2 types. They are either B cells, B as in boy, or T cells, T as in Tom. The B cells are formed and mature in the bone marrow, and they are responsible for humoral immunity. Humoral immunity is the component primarily responsible against extracellular antigens like bacteria that have not entered the cell. This immunity will be inactive, neutralize, and tag unwanted harm or destruction. The other option are T cells. T cells are formed in the bone marrow by the migration to the thymus, where they will mature. T cells are responsible for cellular immunity. Cellular immunity is the component that primarily protects against intercellular antigens, meaning viruses or cancer cells. And there are 4 types of T cells: cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, suppressor T cells, and memory T cells. All right, so that goes over the content that I have for the lymphatic, cardiovascular, and respiratory systems. So chapters 7, 8, and 9. Per usual, I give you your homework list. Initial discussion boards are going to be due on Tuesday, April 25th by midnight. Some of you are still thinking that everything is due on that Saturday, and that is not the case. So I'm going to ask that you please make sure you are looking at your course calendar and my feedback from previous weeks. You have to reply to at least one classmate, preferably 2, by Saturday, April 29th. You'll have another dictation assignment. Again, that looks like a quiz, but it is not a quiz, and that is going to be due on Sunday, April 30th. You have another course project this week. It's on laboratory and diagnostic test results. Again, you are given 2 patients with 2 patient charts that you have to review in order to answer that. And again, that's going to be due on Sunday, April 30th. You have another quiz, so please make sure that you are using your study guides in order to get prepared for your quiz. That's going to be due April 30th. And then your live classroom assignment. So please make sure that you do attend the Module 4 live lecture, which is April 25th at 1 p.m. If you are unable to watch that, please make sure that you do watch the recording of class so you can pick up the code question to answer the live classroom assignment properly. All right, guys, that is all I have. I hope that you all have a wonderful and safe Module 4. Have a great week, guys. Bye-bye.